He pressed the gun to my granddaughter's temple and smiled like he already knew he'd won. "You forgot the rules of the port," my own brother said. 25 years I told myself I'd made peace with losing him. I hadn't. And that night, standing in a warehouse with 50 men and one loaded gun between us, I finally understood why some family wounds are never meant to close all the way. That is where this story ends up. Let me tell you how it started 3 weeks earlier, at a locked gate on the other side of town. My name is Wendell Boudreau. I am 71 years old. For 40 years, I have run barges and container trucks up and down the Cape Fear River, and I built a shipping company out of nothing but a borrowed flatbed and a stubborn refusal to quit. My wife, Odessa, has been beside me for 43 of those years. We raised one son, Roland, and we thought we raised him right. That night, we were standing outside the Harbor Oak Club, the most exclusive private club in Wilmington, North Carolina. My daughter-in-law, Camille, was hosting a launch party for her new boutique fashion line inside. The invitation came from Roland 3 days late with a text that read, "Dress nice, Dad. Mom, please wear something that doesn't look secondhand." I did not tell him the suit I wore was tailored in Charleston by a man who does not put labels on his work. I did not tell him Odessa's blue dress cost more than his monthly rent. To Camille, if it did not have a giant gold logo stitched on the outside, it was trash. We drove up in my Chevrolet, 1998 model, reliable, loud, rusted at the wheel wells. It rumbled like a diesel engine among the silent electric sedans lining the driveway. The valet boys in red vests looked at my truck and did not see a customer. They saw a mistake. The guard at the gate had his hand resting on his belt and sunglasses on after dark. He held up a palm before I even rolled down the window. "State your business," he barked. "We are here for the Ashworth launch party," I said. "I am Wendell Boudreau. This is my wife, Odessa. We are the parents of the host's husband." He scrolled his tablet slow and deliberate, while a black Bentley behind us leaned on its horn. "I do not see a Boudreau on the list," he said. "Staff entrance is around back." "I am not staff," I said, my voice dropping. "I am Roland Boudreau's father. Call him." The guard sighed like he was doing me a favor and tapped his earpiece. "Yeah," he said into it. "I got an older couple out here in a beat-up truck saying they're family. Yeah, I'll hold." We waited while the line of cars behind us grew. Horns blared. Men in tuxedos leaned out their windows and told us to move our junk heap. I sat still. I watched the guard enjoy every second of it. Then the heavy doors of the club opened, and Camille walked out. She looked like glass cut too sharp. Silver dress, backless heels, clicking on the pavement like small gunshots. She did not look at me first. She looked at the guard. "What is the holdup?" she demanded. "We have investors waiting." The guard pointed his thumb at my window. "Says he's your father-in-law. Says he's on the list. I told him staff goes around back." Camille finally turned her head and looked at me through the open window. There was no warmth in it, no memory of the fact that 3 months earlier I had quietly covered Roland's electric bill when he told me they were short. She looked at me, then at Odessa, and she laughed. It was a cold, practiced laugh, the kind built to invite an audience. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said loud enough for the Bentley driver to hear. "Wendell, really? You brought the truck. I told Roland to send you a car service." "We prefer to drive," I said. Camille Odessa said softly. Her voice was steady. Camille rolled her eyes and leaned toward the guard, dropping her voice into something meant to sound like a shared secret. "Look," she said, waving a hand at us like we were an odor. "They're technically family, but they are not on the VIP list for a reason. Don't let them use the main door. It ruins the aesthetic. Have them park in the service lot and come in through the kitchen. Keep them in the back. I don't want them near my investors." The guard grinned. He liked being handed permission to be cruel. "You heard the lady," he said, stepping closer to my window. "Not important. Kitchen entrance, now." Camille did not wait to see us move. She turned on her heel, already rehearsing her smile for the room behind her, already erasing us from the picture she wanted people to see. That was when I turned off my engine. The silence was heavy enough that the guard blinked. "Hey," he said. "I said move it, not park it." He reached for his baton. I did not move. I looked at Odessa. She was already opening her door. She stepped out onto the pavement and stood up to her full height, 5'2" in low heels. But in that moment she looked taller than the guard. She smoothed her dress. She did not look at Camille. She looked only at him. "My husband and I do not enter through kitchens," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Odessa reached into her bag, old leather cracked at the handles, and pulled out a small object. Matte black, no bank logo, no numbers, just a laser-etched signature and a single embedded chip. "Swipe it," she said to the guard. He stared at it like she'd handed him a library card. "I'm not swiping nothin', lady." "Swipe it," Odessa repeated. There was an authority in her voice I had heard only a handful of times in 43 years. The voice she used the year she caught our accountant stealing. The voice that stopped a room of union negotiators cold in 1991. He grabbed it from her hand and walked it to the reader mounted on his booth, waving it in front of the sensor with an eye roll, expecting a red light. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the machine made a sound I had not heard in years. Not a beep, a chime, low and resonant. The lights on the iron gate turned gold, spinning across the pavement. The screen on the booth lit up bright enough to reflect in the guard's sunglasses. 2 words, massive letters. "Owner access." The guard's mouth fell open. The gate began to swing open slow and wide. Camille froze in the driveway, staring at the gold light, staring at the gate, staring at the guard, now practically bowing. "What is happening?" Camille whispered. "Why is the gate opening?" I stepped out of the truck and offered my wife my arm, and we walked past the guard, still apologizing under his breath, toward the open gate. As I passed Camille, I stopped. "You said we were not important," I said. My voice was calm. "Important is a relative word, Camille. You are about to find out exactly how relative it is." I guided Odessa forward, and I left Camille standing alone on the pavement. Her mouth open, her whole world beginning to crack under her heels. She did not know it yet, but that gold light was not a welcome. It was a warning. And the war it started would not end at this gate. It would end 3 weeks later in a warehouse by the river with my own brother's hand on a trigger and a decision I never wanted to have to make standing between us. 3 days before that gate opened, Roland handed me an invitation with an insult folded inside it. Inside that same envelope, without either of us realizing it, was the first thread of a story that had started 25 years earlier. Inside the Harbor Oak Club, Camille did not wait for us to find our own seats. She snapped her fingers at a waiter and pointed to a small table near the kitchen doors, out of sight from the main room. "Sit here," she hissed under her breath once the investors were out of earshot. "Do not move. Do not speak to anyone. And try to look less like you just came from a yard sale." She spun around and walked back toward the center of the room, looping her arm through Roland's. Roland did not look back at us. He never did. I sat down anyway. Odessa sat beside me, spine straight, missing nothing, saying nothing, yet. Near the entrance, I heard Camille explaining us to a cluster of guests holding champagne. "Oh, please excuse the mix-up," she announced, her laugh bright and brittle. "These are Roland's old nannies. Been with the family since he was a baby. We treat them like charity cases, really. You know how it is with the elderly." The guests nodded and lost interest the way people do when a lie is convenient. She had called my wife a servant, the woman who once balanced the books of a logistics company worth 11 figures, and Roland, standing 3 feet away in his rented tuxedo, said nothing. He looked at his shoes. He always looked at his shoes. I placed my hand over Odessa's. "Not yet," I told her with a squeeze. "Not yet." A shadow crossed our table. It was Mr. Castellano, the general manager. A man who had run this club for me for 11 years and knew my face better than his own reflection. He looked at the cheap water glasses on our table, and his expression turned into something close to physical pain. "Mr. Boudreau," he whispered, leaning down. "This is unacceptable. Shall I remove her from her own party?" He meant Camille. I shook my head. Let her have her night, I said, but bring the house wine to her table, the one we keep for the tourists who don't know any better. His eyebrow rose delighted. And for us, I said, bring the 1987 Petrus, the bottle I put in the vault the day I bought this place. At once, sir, he said. And for the first time all evening I felt something close to amusement. While we waited, one man near the investors caught my eye, watching the room the way a man watches a card table he has already decided to win. Gray suit cost more than my truck. I did not know his name yet. A woman near him laughed and said, "Oh, you have to meet him. He's already talking to Camille about Kessler development. Biggest thing happening on the river this year." The name meant nothing to me. And yet something in my chest tightened, unexplainable, like a door creaking in a house I thought I had sealed shut years ago. Odessa leaned closer, repeating part of a sentence Camille had just said to a friend near the bar. Something about needing this launch to work so she could finally, and I quote, get away from being a boudreau for the rest of her life. Odessa's hand tightened around her bag, and for 1 second, the compass inside slid toward the open edge before she caught it and pulled the clasp shut. "Careful," I said quietly. 10 minutes later, Mr. Castellano returned, carrying a bottle covered in the dust of history. He uncorked it with the reverence of a priest and poured a small amount into a crystal glass. Camille smelled it before she saw it. She rose from her seat, heels scraping the floor. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, marching toward us. "Serving the guests, madam," Mr. Castellano replied, cool as ice water. "That is a vintage Petrus," Camille said, pointing a shaking finger. "Do you have any idea what that costs? You're wasting it on them. They can't even appreciate it. They probably think it's grape juice." She turned to me, eyes blazing. "Give that back, Wendell. You are embarrassing me. Drinking the most expensive bottle in the cellar while my investors sip table wine." "It was a gift from the management, Camille," I said, taking a slow sip. "Perhaps they like us better than they like you." She let out a noise somewhere between a laugh and a growl, then spun toward Mr. Castellano. "I want that bottle at my table. Bring 2 more. I'm paying for this event, so I decide who drinks what. Put it on my tab." Mr. Castellano glanced at me. I gave the smallest nod. "Very well, madam," he said. "But for a vintage of this caliber, we require immediate payment. We do not extend tabs for the cellar reserve." Camille scoffed and pulled out a platinum card, the one Roland had opened in his own name, backed by an account I had quietly funded months earlier. "Fine," she snapped, thrusting it at him. "Swipe it. Bring 3 bottles." Mr. Castellano inserted the card into the reader. I already knew what it would say. An hour earlier, sitting in the truck outside the gate, I had sent one message to my banker, instructing him to freeze that very account. The machine let out a harsh, flat tone. "Declined," Mr. Castellano said, loud enough for the room to hear. Camille froze. "Try it again," she hissed. "It's platinum, $50,000 limit." He tried again. Declined. Her face went the color of the cheap wine she had drunk earlier. She looked toward the man in the gray suit watching from across the room. She looked at Roland, patting his empty pockets, searching for a wallet that held nothing but promises he could not keep. "There must be a mistake," Camille stammered. "The chip must be faulty. It says insufficient funds." "Perhaps," Mr. Castellano said, raising his voice just slightly. "The lady would prefer the house wine. It's complimentary tonight for charity cases." He used her own words against her. Camille stood holding a useless piece of plastic while I sat in the shadows with a $5,000 glass of wine. And for one instant, before she caught herself, I saw something flicker behind her eyes that had not been there before. Fear. She retreated to her table, heels dragging instead of clicking. The air in the room had shifted the way it does right before a storm breaks over open water, and I sat there watching, thinking this was only the opening move. I had no idea not yet that the man in the gray suit had been watching the entire exchange with the calm patience of someone who already knew how this story would end, because he was the one who had written its first chapter 25 years before either Roland or Camille was born. The security guard at the front desk of the Ashworth Tower looked at me the way people look at a problem they don't want to solve before their coffee break. "Sir," he said. "We don't have a Roland Boudreau in our directory." And that was the first sign that my son had been lying to my face for half a year. I had not called ahead. I wanted to see the man my son was when he thought no one was watching. I drove downtown, still turning the previous night over in my mind. The gray suit, the frozen card, the sentence. Odessa overheard about getting away from being a Boudreau. None of it sat right. So instead of going home, I went to find my son at the job he had bragged about for 3 years. The one printed on thick cardstock with raised gold lettering. Vice President of Regional Sales, Ashworth Tech. The guard typed the name again, shook his head, and pointed toward a small sign near the elevators. "That address is for the co-working space on the 5th floor," he said. "Virtual office service. They rent desks and mailboxes by the hour. You might try there." I took the elevator up. The doors opened onto a room that smelled like stale coffee and unpaid ambition rows of shared desks, a few strangers typing on laptops to look busy for no one in particular. I walked the rows until I saw him. Roland sat in a corner cubicle, jacket draped over his chair. Playing a game on his phone, tie loosened. The picture of a man with nowhere to be and nowhere to go. He did not notice me until my reflection appeared in his dark computer monitor. He jumped. The phone dropped and clattered on the cheap carpet. "Dad," he said. The word came out like a gasp. "Pack your things," I said. "We're going for a walk." He did not argue. He grabbed his jacket and followed me out, and we walked in silence to a bench across the street. "How long?" I asked. He looked at his hands. 6 months, he said. They let me go. Restructuring. 6 months. For half a year my son had woken up, put on a suit, kissed his wife goodbye, and driven downtown to sit in a rented chair and play games on his phone. "Does Camille know?" I asked. He flinched. "No. God, no, Dad. She can't know. If she found out I was unemployed, she'd leave me. You know how she is. She needs the lifestyle. She needs to believe I'm someone." I looked at my son and felt something twist low in my stomach. He was not a husband in that marriage. He was a hostage paying his own ransom. "So how are you paying for it?" I asked. "The launch party, her dresses, that car service you told me to send instead of driving myself? If you have no salary, where is the money coming from?" Roland began to shake. 38 years old, and in that moment he looked like a boy of 9, caught in a lie too big to carry. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of papers, crumpled and stained with sweat, and handed them to me. I unfolded them. Not bank statements. Loan agreements, but not from any bank I recognized. The kind that comes with a phone number and a threat instead of an interest rate. "You borrowed money from Rocco Scarpetta," I said, my voice dropping low. "Roland, do you have any idea who that man is? He doesn't send collection letters. He sends men with bats." "I had to," Dad Roland said, covering his face. "Camille wanted the party. She said if I didn't support her dream, I was holding her back. She said she'd leave and take everything if we ever had a baby. I thought I could pay it back once the fashion line took off." I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. $52,000 plus interest that doubled every 30 days. Enough to break a man. Enough to get one killed. He grabbed my arm, his grip weak and clammy. "Dad, please. I saw the card last night. I saw that gate open like it belonged to you. You have money. You have to help me. If I don't pay Rocco by Friday, he said he'd come to the house. He said he'd hurt Camille." I looked out at the skyline of a city I had spent 40 years building routes and cranes and docks for, brick by brick, load by load. And I understood in that moment that the empire I built to protect my family was now the very thing my family was using to destroy itself. I could pay the debt. It would cost me less than the wine I drank the night before. But if I paid it without teaching him something first, I would only be financing his next collapse. "I'll pay it," I said. Roland let out a breath that sounded like a sob held too long. He reached to hug me. I held up a hand to stop him. "One condition," I said. "You cut her off. No more credit cards for Camille. No more parties. No more lies dressed up as love. You go home tonight and you tell her the truth, that the job is gone, that the lifestyle is over, that you're going to live within what you actually earn. If she stays after that, she loves you. If she leaves, then she never did, and you were better off finding that out now. Roland nodded so fast it looked like his neck might snap. I will, Dad. I promise. I'll tell her tonight. Just please pay the debt. I can't let them hurt her. I called my banker from that bench and authorized a wire transfer enough to clear the loan and buy him 30 days to find honest work. It's done, I said. The money's in your account. Go pay Rocco today and then go home and be a man, Roland. Be the man I raised you to be. He hugged me before I could stop him. He cried into my shoulder like he had at 7, the year he broke his arm falling off a bike I built him out of spare parts. He told me a dozen times I had saved his life, that he would never lie to me again. I watched him walk toward the subway station, lighter on his feet than he had been in months, and some old, foolish part of me wanted to believe every word of it. I went home and told Odessa everything the fake office, the loan, the promise. She listened without a word, her face still as a photograph. And when I finished, she folded her hands in her lap, the way she does when she has already decided not to trust something, but is choosing not to say so. We ate dinner in silence, both of us hoping that somewhere across town our son was finally telling his wife the truth. I did not know yet that within 24 hours that same $52,000 would be sitting in a driveway, wrapped in a bow, wearing 4 wheels and a German badge on the hood, and that the loan shark my son feared was in the grand architecture of what was coming for us, the smallest and least dangerous man in this story. The photograph loaded slowly on my phone screen, and by the time it finished, I understood that my son had looked me in the eye that afternoon, cried on my shoulder, and lied to me one more time before the ink on the wire transfer had even dried. It was 10 minutes past 9 that night. I was in my armchair with a book I wasn't reading, half listening for the sound of Roland's car pulling into his own driveway across town. The sound of a hard conversation finally happening. Instead, my phone buzzed with a social media notification. I rarely check it. I only kept the account to watch my son and his wife from a safe distance, the way a man watches weather rolling in. It was not a photo of 2 people talking honestly at a kitchen table. It was Camille, standing in the driveway of their rented house, wearing a new dress, and behind her, wrapped in a red bow the size of a bathtub, sat a Porsche Cayenne. The caption read, "Hubby spoils me best. Surprise ever, new car day. Love my life." The timestamp said, 10 minutes ago. Roland had not gone to see Rocco Scarpetta. He had not gone home to tell the truth. He had taken the money I gave him to save his own life and driven it straight to a dealership and used it as a down payment on a way to buy 1 more week of Camille's approval. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I did not feel the hot kind of anger a younger man feels. This was colder than that. The kind that settles into the chest like frost on a windshield. The kind I had not felt since the years I had to cut ties with men who stole from my own shipments. I showed the phone to Odessa. She looked at the picture, the dress, the bow, the shine on the hood of a car that cost more than some people's houses. She did not cry. She took off her reading glasses and folded them closed on the side table, slow and deliberate, the way she does when a decision has already been made somewhere inside her that no amount of talking will undo. "He's gone, Wendell," she said quietly. "The boy we raised is gone. That man out there is a stranger wearing his face." I nodded, but something in me argued back, quiet and stubborn. I thought of Roland at 8 years old, refusing to leave my side on the loading dock, insisting he could carry a crate too heavy for his own arms just to prove he belonged there. That boy had not vanished. He had been buried under 30 years of watching me build something and never once teaching him how to want less than everything. I stood up anyway. I walked to my desk and opened the laptop and logged into the family trust I had set up 9 years earlier. The one that held the deed to the house Roland and Camille lived in. The one that paid their insurance. The one that was supposed to be their safety net if the world ever turned on them. He made his choice, I said to the empty room. Now he has to live with it. I picked up the phone and dialed a number. Not Roland's. I had nothing left to say to him that night that wouldn't come out as something I'd regret. I called Marguerite Dubois, my lawyer for 18 years, the only attorney in this city who had never once flinched at a hard instruction. It was late. She answered on the first ring anyway.
"Mr. Boudreau," she said, "to what do I owe the pleasure at this hour?"
"Marguerite," I said, my voice level. "Initiate protocol ashes." There was a pause on the line. The particular silence of someone who understands exactly what has been asked of them. We had drafted that protocol together 5 years earlier, sitting in her office after a different family crisis. As a worst-case contingency neither of us ever expected to use. It meant total severance. It meant every account, every safety net, every quiet form of support I had built underneath my son's life would disappear overnight. "Are you certain, Wendell?" she asked. "Once we start this, there is no walking it back. He'll lose the house, the car, the credit line. He'll be exposed completely." I looked at the photograph of the Porsche one more time on my screen. At the red bow, at my daughter-in-law's smile. At the caption written in the exact tone of a woman who had never once had to worry about consequences, because someone else always absorbed them for her. "I'm sure," I said. "Burn it down, Marguerite. All of it." I hung up. The war between my family and the outside world had started 3 nights earlier with a swipe of a card at a locked gate. This new war, the one that mattered more, was going to end with a signature on an eviction notice, and it was starting in my own living room, against my own blood. My son wanted to live a lie, built on borrowed money and borrowed time. I was about to teach him the most brutal lesson I knew, the one my own father had never gotten the chance to teach me, before I learned it the hard way, alone, at 22, with nothing but a name and a grudge to carry into the world. The bank of Dad was closed. Permanently. And the rent, after all these years, was finally due. That Sunday morning, the silence in our house was not peaceful. It was the particular kind of silence that sits in a room before a storm breaks heavy and expectant. Odessa sat by the window, knitting a scarf she had started for Nadia's birthday 3 months early, the way she always worked with her hands when her mind needed somewhere else to go. I sat at my desk, watching the notifications roll in one by one on my secure banking application. Protocol Ashes was live. It was not a single explosion. It was a slow, methodical suffocation. First, the joint account Roland used for groceries and gas went dark. Then the emergency fund I had quietly topped up every month for 3 years vanished from view. Finally, the automatic payment on their utility bills linked to my account for half a decade was canceled with a single keystroke. Across town. I knew exactly what that morning would feel like for them. A declined card at a coffee shop, a rejected payment on the cable bill, and then sometime around noon, realization arriving like a freight train with no brakes. The screen lit up with a face I did not expect to see that afternoon. And for one terrible second before I understood what I was looking at, I let myself smile. It was just past noon. Odessa was still by the window with her knitting when my phone rang with a video call, the caller ID reading Nadia's iPad. My chest did the thing it always did at the sight of that name. Some old muscle memory of a girl running across a school pickup line straight into my arms. I answered before the second ring finished. "Nadia, sweetie," I said, my voice already softening. "How are you, baby girl?" But it was not Nadia's smile that filled the screen. She was sitting in a chair, small and still, and standing behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder, was Camille. Camille was not shouting. She was smiling a tight, careful smile that did not belong anywhere near a child. "Say hello to Grandpa, Nadia, Camille," said her voice, syrupy and light, though I could see her fingers pressing down harder than the words let on. "Hi, Grandpa," Nadia whispered. She glanced sideways at her mother, then back at the screen. "Nadia, honey, are you okay?" I asked. "Where's your father?" Camille's hand tightened. "Tell him what we talked about, sweetie," she prompted. "Tell Grandpa what he is." Nadia's lip trembled. "I do not want to say it, Mommy," she said so quietly, I had to lean toward the phone to catch it. "Say it," Camille hissed just off camera. "Or no tablet for a month, and no seeing Daddy until he fixes this." I will not repeat the words my granddaughter was made to say into that screen. I will only tell you that they were not hers. They belonged to a grown woman who had decided that a child's voice was a more effective weapon than her own, and that Nadia, 8 years old, cried before she finished the sentence, one single tear sliding down her cheek, while she looked at me like she was asking for permission to stop. Odessa gasped beside me and pressed her hand over her mouth. Nadia, listen to me, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could make it. That is not true. Grandpa loves you. Grandma loves you. We are not what she told you to say. Camille snatched the iPad away before I could finish. Her own face filled the screen, now sharp and furious. Did you hear that, Wendell? She spat. She knows what you are. A stingy old man trying to ruin her future. You want to cut us off? Fine. Then you're cut off too. You'll never see her again. You'll never speak to her again. Unless she let the word hang there the way a person holds a knife, just close enough for you to see the edge of it. Unless what, Camille? I asked. My voice had gone cold. The same cold that had settled into my chest the night before. Unless you sign over the house, she said. The deed to your little property on the river. I know it's worth more than it looks. Transfer the title to me and maybe, just maybe, I'll let Nadia come visit. Otherwise, she grows up thinking her grandfather is a monster who abandoned her. She did not wait for an answer. The screen went black. I sat there, staring at my own reflection in the dark glass of the phone. I did not feel the rage I expected to feel. I felt something closer to grief, the particular grief of watching someone use the most innocent person you love as a bargaining chip, and understanding that the person doing it had calculated exactly how much that would cost me before she ever dialed the number. Money is one thing, I said quietly, to no one in particular. Disrespect is another. But this, using a child to extort an old man, that is an act of war. Odessa stood without a word and walked to the kitchen sink. She filled a glass of water with hands that were shaking, though her eyes stayed dry, the way they always did when the wound went deeper than tears could reach. She wants the house, Odessa said, finally, her back still to me. She thinks it's just an old house on a big lot near the river. She has no idea. She was right. Camille had done her homework, but she had opened the wrong book. She knew the neighborhood along the Cape Fear had been quietly gentrifying for years. She knew developers were buying up waterfront lots one at a time. She had likely priced our 5 acres somewhere around $1 million, enough to make blackmail feel worth the risk. What she did not know, what even Roland did not know, was that the land our house sat on had been rezoned for high-density commercial use 9 years earlier, after a fight with the city council that took most of a decade to win. And 2 weeks before that phone call, I had received an appraisal from a developer hoping to build a waterfront hotel complex on the site. The offer was $15 million. Camille was trying to extort me for a fraction of what she thought was a fortune, unaware she was standing at the edge of a gold mine, and unaware she was willing to break her own daughter's heart to reach for the wrong number entirely. She will never get it, I said, more to myself than to Odessa. Not 1 square inch. Not 1 blade of grass. I looked down at my hands, still faintly trembling, though I could not have said whether it was from fury or from the sound of my granddaughter's voice cracking on a sentence she never should have had to speak. Odessa came back and sat beside me without a word, and for a long time neither of us said anything at all. Because some silences do not need filling, they only need surviving. Somewhere in that silence, I thought of the compass sitting in Odessa's bag by the front door. The one that had opened a gate 2 nights earlier and made a grown man in sunglasses shake. It had felt, for one evening, like proof that we could not be touched. I understood now how wrong that feeling had been. A man can own half a river and still lie awake, unable to protect the one voice in his life small enough to break. The next morning, a courier arrived at our front door before I had even finished my coffee, carrying an envelope thick enough to hold something worse than an apology. The document called me a danger to myself. It called Odessa a woman suffering from advanced cognitive decline, unable to manage her own affairs, unable to care for her own husband. And it asked a judge to hand our lives, our house, and everything we had built over 40 years to the same woman who had used our granddaughter as leverage 2 days earlier.
I read it standing on the porch, the morning coffee going cold beside me.
Odessa watched from her chair, needles paused mid-stitch.
Emergency petition for guardianship, the header read.
Petitioner Camille Boudreau. Reason for petition: severe cognitive decline and inability to manage financial affairs.
The attached affidavit was a work of fiction elaborate enough to almost be impressive.
It claimed I had been found wandering the neighborhood, confused, unable to state my own address. It claimed I was giving away large sums of money irrationally to strangers without explanation. It claimed Odessa was suffering from advanced dementia and could no longer care for herself, let alone for me. For our own safety, the document read, we required immediate placement in a secure state facility,
The kind of place people go to be forgotten by everyone who once loved them, and who had been proposed as our legal guardian with full authority over our assets and our persons, Camille Boudreau.
She was not just after the land anymore. She wanted to lock us away entirely, strip us of every decision we would ever make again. Bury us alive in a facility with fluorescent lighting and locked doors while she danced through what remained of our estate.
I looked up from the paper. The sun was out. Birds were working the feeder Odessa kept filled by the kitchen window. It was, by any measure, a beautiful morning. A beautiful morning for a fight. I walked back inside and picked up the phone.
"Marguerite?" I said when she answered. "They serve the papers."
I know she said, her voice already sharp, already awake.
"I saw the filing this morning. They're moving fast, Wendell. There's a hearing scheduled for Thursday. They're trying to ambush you before you can build a defense."
"Let them try," I said. "They want a war, Marguerite.
They want to prove I'm an incompetent old man who needs a keeper."
"So what's the plan?" she asked.
"Do we file a counter motion, get you an independent medical evaluation, something on record before Thursday?"
"No," I said.
"A counter motion is defensive. I'm done playing defense."
I looked at the photograph of Nadia on the mantel.
The one from her 6th birthday. The one Camille's affidavit had somehow found room to describe as evidence of my declining judgment for having spoiled her with too large a gift. "We are going to give them exactly what they're asking for, Marguerite."
There was a silence on the line.
"Excuse me, Wendell. They say I'm a confused old man," I said. "They say I'm losing my mind. Then let's show them a confused old man. Let's give them a performance they will never forget as long as they live."
I explained the plan while Odessa sat listening, her knitting forgotten in her lap.
It was risky. It required trusting the one thing Camille had consistently underestimated about me, the very thing her affidavit claimed I no longer had: my mind. 40 years of reading men across a negotiating table, of knowing which lie in a shipping manifest was worth investigating and which was simply a tired clerk's mistake. All of it came down now to convincing my own family that none of it remained.
When I hung up, I turned to Odessa.
"Get the soup ready tonight, my dear," I said. "And leave the stove on just a little too long when she's watching. We're going to have guests for dinner, and we need to set the stage properly."
Odessa's smile was small and sad.
The kind that carries grief and resolve in the same breath. "You're going to play the fool?" she said.
"I am going to play the fool," I agreed.
"Because a fool is the one thing a king never has to fear. And Camille already believes she's a queen."
The trap was set.
Now all that remained was waiting for the rats to come for the cheese, and I had a feeling they would not make us wait long.
They did not.
The sun had barely started its slide toward the horizon when headlights swept across our living room window. A car easing into our driveway. Instead of stopping at the curb the way strangers park, I watched from behind the curtain.
Camille stepped out first,
and for a moment I did not recognize her. Gone was the silver dress, the designer armor she wore like a second skin. She was in a simple floral dress and flats, her hair loose around her shoulders. Roland followed a step behind her, carrying a covered casserole dish in both hands like an offering, a bottle of sparkling cider tucked under one arm. They looked for one unsettling moment like a photograph from a furniture catalog advertising the perfect American family. The transformation was so complete, so sudden, that it raised the hair on the back of my neck. 2 days earlier, they had been threatening us with courts and guardianship filings. Tonight, they looked like they had come to bring us a casserole and apologize for a misunderstanding over dinner reservations. Odessa came to stand beside me at the window. Her eyes had gone hard and narrow. She did not trust this any more than I did. "Let them in," I said quietly. "Let's see what act of the play we're watching now." I opened the door before they could knock. Camille's smile arrived a half-second too fast, too wide, showing more teeth than a genuine smile ever does. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice pitched soft and trembling as though she were holding back tears of remorse that had taken real effort to summon. "Hi, Mom. We come in peace." She lifted the casserole dish slightly, an offering held out like a white flag. "I made your favorite," she said, looking past me toward Odessa. "Chicken pot pie, from scratch. We just wanted to come over and apologize. We've been under so much stress. We said things we didn't mean. We want to start over." Behind her, Roland stared at his own shoes, pale, silent, looking like a man walking towards something he already knew the ending of, and could not stop himself from attending anyway. We let them in. And as the smell of butter and lavender filled our front hallway, I caught Roland's eyes for just a moment before he looked away again, and in that flicker of contact I understood something Camille had not yet realized about her own husband. Whatever act they had rehearsed on the drive over, my son had not fully learned his lines. The moment the sauce touched my tongue, I understood that my daughter-in-law had not come to apologize. She had come to finish what the guardianship petition could not. "Please sit," Camille had said, pulling out chairs for us like a hostess who had never once made us feel unwelcome in her life. "Let's just have a nice family dinner. No talk about lawyers, no talk about money, just us." We sat. Odessa beside me. Camille served the pie herself, steaming and rich, a generous portion in front of me, another in front of Odessa. Roland received a smaller piece. Camille took only a thin sliver for herself and did not touch her fork. "Eat up," she said, her eyes bright with something that did not match her voice. "It's best hot." She watched me the way a woman watches a pot she is waiting to boil. Roland pushed his own food around his plate without eating, his hand shaking badly enough that his fork clicked twice against the china before he set it down entirely. I lifted my spoon. The pie looked ordinary. It smelled of chicken and thyme, nothing more. I glanced at Camille. She offered an encouraging nod. "Go on, Dad," she said. "Tell me if it's too salty." I brought the spoon to my mouth. The flavor hit fast, creamy, savory, layered with herbs, the way any good pot pie should be. But underneath it, faint enough that most people would never notice, was something else entirely. I am not most people. 40 years of driving routes through parts of this country where the water ran the color of rust, where a wrong sip could put a man in a hospital bed for a week, had taught me things a man never wants to know he learned. I knew the taste of danger in food the way other men knew the sound of a car engine misfiring. This tasted like copper. Like a battery pressed against the tip of a wet tongue, a sharp, metallic bitterness the cream could not wash away. I did not swallow right away. I held it there, analyzing the way I once analyzed a shipment that smelled wrong before I let it near a warehouse full of other men's cargo. This was not a spice. This was not a cooking mistake. This was chemical. I looked at Roland. He had stopped even pretending to eat. He was staring at me, his face slick with a sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He knew. My own son knew exactly what was sitting in that dish, and he was watching his father lift it to his lips anyway. I swallowed. It went down hard, deliberate, a performance disguised as an accident. "Is it good?" Camille asked, leaning forward. Her knuckles pale where they gripped the edge of the table. "It's delicious, Camille," I said, my voice even. "What spices did you use?" "Oh, just the usual," she said, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Sage, rosemary, a little love." I looked at Odessa. Her spoon was already halfway to her mouth. I moved fast. I knocked my water glass over, a clumsy motion the kind a distracted old man might make without thinking. Water splashed across the tablecloth and struck Odessa's arm. "Oh no," I exclaimed, standing. "I'm so clumsy, Odessa. I'm sorry." Odessa dropped her spoon and looked at me. Whatever she saw in my eyes in that half second told her everything she needed to know. "It's okay, Wendell," she said, standing and brushing water from her sleeve. "Just water. Let me get a towel." "Don't eat it," I whispered, as I helped her up close enough that only she could hear. "Don't touch it." She stiffened but nodded and crossed to the kitchen sink without another word. I grabbed a handful of napkins and started mopping the spill. And in the confusion, I lifted both plates, mine and Odessa's. "I'll just clear this," I said. "Got soggy from the water." "No," Camille said sharply, half rising from her chair. "It's fine, Dad. Just eat yours. We can get Mom more." I ignored her. "Mine and Odessa's," I said, already walking toward the back door. "I'll scrape these and we can start fresh. I hate eating at a messy table." "Where are you going?" Camille asked, her voice climbing toward panic. "The trash is under the sink," I said. "I always give the scraps to the stray out back. He waits on the porch. Shame to waste good chicken." I did not wait for permission. I stepped out into the cool evening air and pulled the door shut behind me, though I did not let it latch. Through the gap, I could hear Camille hissing at Roland. "He's ruining it," she whispered furiously. "He's throwing it away." "Shut up," Roland hissed back. "He'll hear you." There was a scrawny orange cat that had been living under our garden shed for the better part of a year. One I had taken to feeding scraps most evenings without ever quite admitting to Odessa that I'd named him. He came trotting toward the sound of the door, meowing for his usual handout. I looked at the plate in my hand. The sauce glistened under the porch light, and for a moment I felt something closer to nausea than curiosity. Because if my instincts were right, if the taste in my mouth meant what I believed it meant, then the people sitting at my dining table were not simply greedy. They were something far worse than that. I scraped a small amount of filling onto the wooden boards. Just a spoonful. "Here, boy," I whispered. "I'm sorry." He ate it eagerly, the way he ate everything, licking the wood clean before sitting back to groom his paws. I waited, watching him in the porch light, listening to the low murmur of voices inside the house. Voices that were waiting for me to come back, waiting for something to start. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then his ears twitched. He shook his head hard as though water had gotten into them, and let out a low, uneasy sound before his legs simply gave out beneath him. His body went rigid on the boards, and I watched cold all the way through as whatever had been placed in that dish did to a stray animal in front of me what it had been meant to do more slowly and more privately to two people at that table. I knelt beside him in the dark, my hand hovering uselessly above his shaking body, and I understood with a clarity that felt almost peaceful in its horror exactly what kind of dinner I had just been invited to. Whatever performance I had rehearsed with Marguerite the night before now felt small and slow next to what was sitting on that table, cooling under fluorescent light, waiting for 2 more spoonfuls to disappear. I walked back into my own kitchen, wearing the face of a man who no longer knew where he was. And the hardest part was not the acting. The hardest part was knowing that somewhere behind that door, a stray cat lay shaking on my porch because of the woman about to hand me a napkin. I let my hands tremble as I set the empty plates in the sink. I let my eyes lose their focus. I let my mouth hang open just slightly the way I had seen it hang on a stroke patient I once visited in a hospital hallway years ago. A memory I had never expected to need again. I walked back to the table. Camille was watching me the way a hawk watches a field mouse that has stopped moving. Roland stared at his water glass like it might tell him what to do. "Did the cat like it?" Camille asked, an edge of amusement in her voice she did not bother to hide. I blinked slowly. I looked at her as though I did not recognize her for a full second. "Cat," I mumbled. "What cat?" "I thought I was feeding the chickens." Camille's eyes lit up. She glanced at Roland and smiled a small, victorious smile. "It's starting," she mouthed at him. I sat down heavily. I rubbed my temples. "I feel funny," I said, letting my voice slur at the edges. "Dizzy. Everything's spinning."
I reached across the table and took Odessa's hand, squeezing it 3 times the signal we had agreed on that morning, the one that meant whatever happens next, play along. Odessa looked at me and understood immediately. She slumped in her chair. "Me too, Wendell," she whispered. "I feel so tired." Camille pulled her phone from her pocket and began recording. "Oh no," she said, her voice suddenly dripping with concern for whatever audience she imagined watching. "Roland, look at them. They're having another episode. Dad, are you okay? Do you know where you are?" I looked directly into the camera lens and let my head roll back against the chair. "Who are you?" I slurred. "Where's my truck? I have a delivery." "Perfect," Camille whispered to herself, lowering the phone slightly. She thought she had her evidence. What she did not know was that in my jacket pocket sat a small sealed bag with a spoonful of that same filling, evidence of my own, collected while she thought I was only feeding scraps to a stray. The man she was filming was not losing his mind at all. He was sharpening a blade she could not see, and every word she spoke into that camera was one more nail she was driving into her own hand. The performance did not stop with a shout. It built the way I had planned it, slow and humiliating, because humiliation was the currency Camille valued most, and I intended to hand her an entire vault of it. I let my legs go heavy. I let my shoulders slump forward, as if gravity itself had doubled. I looked across the table at my son. Roland was wiping sweat from his forehead, eyes darting between me and the empty plate where the pie had been. He looked terrified. He looked guilty. I needed him to look convinced. I stood slowly gripping the table edge until my knuckles went white. I let my jaw go slack. I stared past Roland at the wall behind him. "Marcus," I whispered. My voice came out raspy, older than my own. "Marcus, is that you?" Roland froze. Marcus was my younger brother, dead 30 years now, in a warehouse accident, a name we almost never spoke aloud in this house. "Dad," Roland said, his voice cracking. "It's me, Roland, your son." I shook my head violently. I slammed my open palm on the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. "Don't lie to me, Marcus," I shouted, letting a thread of saliva slip from the corner of my mouth. "You promised to help me load the truck. The shipment's late. The union boss is going to kill us. Where have you been?" I took a step toward him, dragging my left leg behind me, a detail borrowed from that same hospital hallway years ago. The horror on Roland's face was not performance. Camille looked at him, he stammered, the panic scrambling his own script. "He thinks I'm Uncle Marcus. He's hallucinating." Camille did not look horrified. She looked delighted watching me, with the cold, clinical interest of a scientist observing a lab animal behave exactly as predicted. "It's happening," she said softly. "The toxins are hitting his frontal lobe, confusion, memory regression. It's perfect. Keep him talking, Roland. We need more." I gave her more. I spun in a slow circle, appearing lost in my own dining room, and reached for the buckle of my belt with shaking fingers. "I have to go," I muttered loud enough for them both to hear. "The bathroom. Who moved the bathroom?" "Dad! No!" Roland yelled, rushing toward me. "That's a plant. The bathroom's down the hall." I ignored him. I let my pants slip slightly at the waist. I was never going to relieve myself in front of my own wife, but I needed to sell the full weight of the indignity needed them to believe that the man who had spent 40 years building an empire out of nothing had finally lost every last thread of shame. Roland grabbed my arms, trying to pull me back. I fought him weakly, swinging one arm and catching him across the chest. "Get off me!" I roared. "You're trying to steal my cargo. I know you are." I let myself collapse to the floor, curling into a loose fetal position, and began to weep loud and confused. Not the practiced tears of a courtroom performance, but the raw, embarrassing sound of a man who has lost the thread of his own life. "I want to go home," I wailed. "Please. I just want to go home." Roland stood over me, breathing hard, staring down at what he believed was his father's collapse. He looked at Camille. "He's lost it completely," Roland said. "We have to call an ambulance."
No, Camille said sharply. She stood and walked over, looking down at me with something close to a sneer. Not yet. She reached into her purse, but she did not pull out a phone to dial emergency services. She pulled out a second phone, opened a live streaming app, and set it to a private group. I caught the name of it reflected in the hallway mirror behind her. The Inner Circle. She hit record. "Hey guys," she said to the screen, dropping her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "You are not going to believe this." She thought she was filming my downfall. She had no idea she was filming her own confession, word for word, in front of an audience that would one day include a courtroom. "I know, right?" she said to the screen, laughing softly at something one of her viewers had typed. "It's like living in a nursing home already. The smell of old people is the worst." I lay there on the rug listening to her mock the man who had quietly paid off her husband's debts more than once. The man who had welcomed her into a family that had never once asked her to prove anything, who had funded a launch party she never thanked him for. Every word she spoke was another log thrown onto a fire I intended to burn her with later. I memorized the glee in her voice. I memorized every syllable of it, the way you memorize the exact shape of a wound so you can describe it precisely to the person who has to stitch it closed. But the most important part of what happened in that kitchen was not my performance. It was what Odessa was doing behind Camille's back. She sat at the table, head in her hands, rocking gently, moaning in a low, broken register, meant to sound like grief and confusion. "Oh, Wendell," she wailed. "What happening?" Camille ignored her, entirely too absorbed in her star subject on the floor. She walked to the kitchen island and set her phone down on a wireless charging pad propped against the fruit bowl so it could keep filming the room while she poured herself a glass of water. "I'm parched," she announced to the camera. "Being a caregiver is such hard work." She turned her back to fill the glass at the tap. That was the moment Odessa stopped rocking. Her head snapped up, the grief vanishing from her face in an instant, replaced by the sharp, calculating look of a woman who had spent 30 years auditing books for a logistics company before she ever became a grandmother. She reached into her sleeve and produced a small black device. Not the kind of thing you see in a spy film, but the kind forensic accountants use. A wireless data cloner ordered online 3 days earlier, once we understood how deep the rot had gone. Odessa had researched it herself, sitting at this same table, with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, refusing to let me handle the purchase in case my name ever surfaced in a receipt somewhere. Odessa moved with the speed of someone half her age. She leaned across the table without touching the phone and slid the device beneath the charging pad and waited. It needed 10 seconds to complete the handshake with Camille's phone. Her eyes found mine across the room. A microscopic nod. I understood immediately. She needed 10 seconds, and I was the only one who could buy them. I let out a scream, a raw animal sound that surprised even me. "The rats!" I yelled, pointing at the ceiling. "They're eating the money! Stop them!" Camille spun around, water sloshing from her glass. "What the hell?" she snapped, staring at me, not at the phone. 1 second, 2 seconds. I thrashed on the floor, kicking the leg of the table. "Get them off me!" I screamed. 3 seconds. 4. Roland lunged to hold me down. "Dad, stop it!" he shouted. "There are no rats!" 5 seconds. 6. I grabbed his lapels and pulled him close, whispering frantically. "They're in the walls, Roland. They're eating the inheritance. 7 seconds. 8. Camille rolled her eyes unimpressed and turned back to the sink to dump the rest of her water. 9 seconds. 10. The small light beneath the charging pad blinked from red to green. Done. Every text message, every call log, every deleted email, every recorded location on Camille's phone was now copying itself quietly and invisibly to a secure server that Marguerite could access within the hour. Odessa sat back and returned to her wailing, as though nothing had happened at all. "Wendell, please stop," she cried, hands over her face once more. Camille picked her phone back up, checked the screen, and noticed nothing. No lag, no warning. Nothing to suggest that the device she had propped so casually against a fruit bowl had just betrayed every secret she carried inside it. She smiled at the camera one last time. "All right, guys, she said. "I have to go deal with this mess. Wish me luck. We're calling the doctor in the morning. This nightmare is almost over." She ended the stream. She did not know how right she was about that last part. The nightmare was almost over. But she was the one who was about to wake up screaming. I lay back on the rug and let my eyes close. The floorboards were hard beneath my spine. Somewhere above me, the ceiling fan turned in its slow, tired circle, the only sound left in the room besides my own breathing. The porch light through the kitchen window had gone the color of weak tea. I did not move for a long moment, not because the performance required it anymore, but because my body needed the stillness more than my mind did. We were inside now. We had eyes on our secrets, and by tomorrow morning we would be listening to everything Camille had spent months trying to bury. Odessa found me there a few minutes later, once the sound of Camille's car had finally pulled out of the driveway. She did not say anything at first. She simply lowered herself onto the floor beside me, her knees cracking softly, and rested one hand flat against my chest, the way she used to check for a fever on our son when he was small. She said quietly, "I did not feel like a man who had done well. I felt like a man who had just spent an hour lying to his own son's face while a woman filmed it for entertainment." "Tomorrow we listen," Odessa said. "Tonight we sleep, if either of us still remembers how." We did not sleep much. But we lay in the dark a long while without speaking, listening to the house settle around us, the old pipes ticking, the wind moving through the oak outside our window. And for the first time in 3 days, neither of us reached for a phone or a folder or a plan. We simply lay there, breathing, letting the day end the way ordinary days used to end, before any of this began, before a compass, before a courtroom, before a woman we had once welcomed into our home decided we were worth less than the metal in her purse. The voice on the recording said 4 words, and every year I had spent building a life on the other side of a courtroom collapsed into the space of a single breath. It was not a stranger's voice. It was my brother's. We had not moved from the kitchen table since Camille's car pulled out of the driveway 2 hours earlier. The clock above the stove ticked in the dark. Somewhere down the hall, the refrigerator hummed, then fell silent, then hummed again. Odessa had not touched her tea. It sat cooling between us, a thin skin already forming on the surface. The laptop screen glowed pale blue, the only light in a house that felt like it was holding its breath along with us. Roland was asleep in the guest room, exhausted from the strain of his own lies. Camille, according to the tracker Marguerite had quietly attached to her signal, was awake, pacing somewhere in the master bedroom of a house I no longer paid for. The sound of her footsteps came through the speakers, first steady, quick, like a heartbeat working itself towards something it had been chasing for a long time. Then the tap of a number being dialed, not a local one, a private line, encrypted, meant to be untraceable by anyone who did not already own the equipment to trace it. It rang once, twice. Then a man answered. "Hello, beautiful," he said. "Is it done?" Did the old man crack? Camille let out a breath that sounded almost like a shudder of relief. "It's done," she whispered. "The show was perfect. He's completely gone. Pissing on the floor, screaming about rats. It was pathetic. We have it all on video. The doctor signs off tomorrow morning. We'll have power of attorney by Friday." The man laughed, a dry, scratching sound like sandpaper dragged slowly across bone. "Good girl," he said. "You did well. I told you they were weak. I told you he would break." I froze with my hand hovering over the pause button, unable to move it. Something in that laugh had reached backward through 25 years and found a door I had believed I sealed shut for good. Odessa noticed before I could hide it. "Wendell," she said quietly. "What is it?" I could not answer her yet. I needed to hear the rest first, needed to be certain that the ground opening beneath me was real, and not some trick my own exhausted mind was playing after 3 sleepless nights. To understand why that laugh nearly stopped my heart, you have to go back to a warehouse floor 35 years before. That phone call to 2 brothers who grew up sharing a single mattress in a house our father rented month to month, working the same docks, chasing the same impossible dream of one day owning a piece of the waterfront, instead of only unloading it. Our father died when I was 22, and Elias was 19, leaving us a small parcel of land near the West Side Terminal, barely worth anything on paper, and a promise spoken more than written that we would build something on it together. I worked every job the port would give me. I saved every dollar I could hide from my own hunger, sleeping some winters with the heat turned off to keep more of it in the coffee can under my bed. Elias wanted a faster road to the same destination, and he found men willing to offer him one. Men who dealt in favors that always came due at the worst possible moment, usually with interest measured in something other than money. When the debts came looking for payment, Elias told our father's oldest partner that I had forged the land transfer papers to cut him out entirely. It was a lie built cleanly enough to survive a family's scrutiny for exactly as long as it took me to lose everything my share of the land. My name in the only community that had ever known me, and for a while, my own brother's face at every holiday table, for the rest of both our lives. I never forged anything. I spent 3 years proving it in rooms nobody outside our family ever saw, small church offices, and a lawyer's back room, and once memorably the kitchen of an aunt who cried the entire time she read the notarized documents that cleared my name. By the time the truth finally surfaced, Elias was already gone, vanished into whatever city takes in men running from the wreckage of their own choices. And our family, the aunts, the cousins, the elders who once blessed both our names in the same breath, had already decided it was easier to believe the lie than to admit they'd chosen a side without proof. I built everything I have since then without him. I told myself for 25 years that I had made peace with the space where a brother should have been. The recording pulled me back into the present, back into the ugly, unfinished business of that night. Camille was talking again, her voice threading fear and excitement together in a way that turned my stomach. "So when do I get the rest of the money?" she asked. I did my part, Desmond. I humiliated them. I got the evidence. I made Roland think it was his idea to sell. Now I want my payout. "Patience, my dear," the man purred. And hearing that name did something the laugh alone had not. It confirmed. It took the shape forming in my chest and made it solid. Desmond, not a stranger's business name, a name I now understood had been built deliberately, letter by letter, out of the ashes of a man I had once shared a mattress with. It was not really Desmond Kessler investing in Kessler Development. It was Elias, wearing a name he had invented to bury the one our father gave him, sitting patiently for 25 years, waiting for exactly this kind of opening to walk back into my life through my own son's front door. Odessa's hand found mine across the table, and I realized only then that I had been gripping the edge of it hard enough to leave marks in the wood. She did not ask me to explain. She had been married to me long enough to know that some truths need a moment of silence before they can be spoken out loud. And she gave me that moment without a word. "That's not Desmond Kessler," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper, the words arriving strange and heavy in my own mouth, after 25 years of never saying them aloud. "That's my brother." Odessa did not ask which brother. She had heard the name Elias exactly twice in 43 years of marriage, both times late at night, both times followed by a silence I had never once broken with an explanation. She simply nodded slowly, as though a puzzle she had been quietly assembling for years had just handed her its final piece. "He built a name to bury a name," I said. "He built a company to bury a debt he was never actually owed. And he found the one door into my life I never thought to guard, my own son's marriage, and he walked through it wearing another man's face for 25 years waiting." I did not knock. I opened the door to the guest room and shook my son's shoulder hard enough to pull him out of whatever shallow sleep he'd managed to find. "Wake up," I said. He opened his eyes, groggy, confused. "Dad, what is it? Is something wrong?" "Everything is wrong," I said. I set the laptop on the bedside table and opened it. The screen glowed blue in the dark lighting, his tired face from below. "I have something you need to hear, and I need you to be strong because after tonight, nothing will be the same again." I did not let him listen to it in that room. The walls were too thin for what I was about to unleash. Camille was still awake, across town, dreaming of power of attorney and a payout she hadn't earned, and I needed total isolation for what came next. I told Roland to get dressed. He looked at me with confusion, but something in my face stopped him from arguing. We drove in silence to the old dispatch office at the edge of the shipyard, a brick building I'd bought 40 years earlier, the place where I made my first real money and buried my first failures. Inside, a single metal chair sat bolted to the concrete floor left over from decades when we'd had to question drivers suspected of stealing cargo. I pointed to it. "Sit down, Roland." He hesitated, looking at the peeling paint, the barred windows, the darkness pressing in from every corner. "Dad, what's going on?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Why are we here?" I did not answer. I connected the laptop to a set of old industrial speakers bolted near the desk, wanting the sound to fill the room completely. Wanting it to feel less like a recording and more like a verdict. "You asked me last week if Camille loves you," I said. "You asked me why I don't trust her." I pressed play. Camille's voice exploded into the room, amplified, slightly distorted by the volume, but unmistakable. It began exactly where I had paused it hours earlier. "He's pathetic, Desmond," she said, sobbing in the other room, thinking he's saving his father. "He actually believes I love him." I watched Roland's face. At first there was only confusion, his eyebrows pulling together as though the words refused to arrange themselves into meaning. "He believes we're doing this for the family." Camille continued, her voice dripping with amusement. "He has no idea. He's just a pawn. He's useful for his signature, and that's it." Roland flinched like he'd been struck. "Dad, turn it off," he begged. "Please. I don't want to hear this." I did not turn it off. I turned it up. "Once the house is sold, I'm filing for divorce," Camille said. "I can't stand his touch anymore. I can't stand his smell." Roland began to shake the metal chair, rattling faintly against the concrete. Tears streamed down his face, but they were not tears of sadness yet. They were tears of shock, the particular kind that arrives before the mind has caught up to what the ears already know. "He's a dog," Camille's voice said. "An obedient little dog. I kick him and he licks my hand. I tell him to jump and he asks how high. It's almost too easy." Roland let out a sound I had never heard from another human being. A long, guttural howl that seemed to come from somewhere below language entirely. He threw his head back and screamed at the ceiling until his face went dark red, until there was no breath left in him to scream with. "Kill me," he gasped, choking on his own saliva. "Dad, please, just kill me. I want to die. Let me die." He began slamming the back of his head against the chair once, twice, trying to knock himself unconscious, trying to end the noise inside his own skull by whatever means his body could find. I stepped forward and grabbed his hair, pulling his head forward before he could do it a third time. "Look at me," I commanded. He would not open his eyes. He was sobbing uncontrollably now, his whole body convulsing with it. "I cannot live with this," he wailed. "She was my whole life. I did everything for her. And she thinks I'm a dog. I am nothing. I am garbage. If you love me, kill me." He was broken in a way I had never seen him broken. Not as a boy who fell off a bike. Not as a man who lost a job he was too ashamed to admit losing. This was something closer to the bottom of a well. I raised my hand and slapped him. It was not gentle. It cracked through the small room like a gunshot, and his head snapped sideways. The sobbing stopped, replaced by a stunned, ringing silence. "You do not get to die," I said, my face inches from his. "Dying is easy, Roland. Dying is for cowards. You dug this hole. You invited this into our house, and now you want to quit and leave your mother and me to clean up what's left of you?" "I am a dog," he whispered. "She said I'm a dog." "Then bite," I said. "She thinks you're a dog, fine. Be a dog. But not her dog. Be mine. Be the one that guards the gate. Be the one that finally rips the throat out of whoever put the leash on you in the first place." Roland stared at me, his eyes red and swollen, something shifting behind them that had not been there an hour earlier. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice raw but steady now.
I want you to go back to her tomorrow, I said. Apologize. Tell her you finally understand your place, that you'll sign whatever she needs signed. I want you to become the best actor this family has ever produced. Because the man on that recording, the dog, is who she believes she owns, and a woman that certain of her own victory stops watching for the knife. And Elias Rowland asked, wiping his face. What about him? Uncle Elias is the reason any of this is happening, I said. He built a fortune on a lie he told about me 25 years ago, and he found the one crack in our family wide enough to climb back through. Camille is not his partner. She is his weapon. And weapons get discarded the moment they're no longer sharp. I pulled a folding knife from my pocket and cut the tape from his wrists. His arms fell limp at his sides, red-marked, but free. Stand up, I said. He stood, swaying slightly, whole for the first time in that room. I'm still your son, he said, more question than statement. You are more my son tonight than you have been in 3 years, I said. Now let's go home and figure out how a dog learns to hunt. The word poisoning landed in that courtroom like a dropped glass, and for 3 full seconds nobody in the gallery remembered how to breathe. The hearing had been scheduled to run before lunch, a formality Camille had every reason to expect would end in her favor. In most guardianship cases, when a family arrives with video evidence of an elder in visible distress, a judge signs the order and moves to the next docket item without much ceremony. Camille had built her entire morning around that assumption. She sat at the petitioner's table in a beige cardigan and a skirt that fell modestly below her knee, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she had visibly pre-crumpled for effect. Beside her sat Dr. Aldous Penrose, a small man with damp palms who kept adjusting his glasses as though the gesture alone could lend him credibility. Judge Harmon Wexley, a man with a face carved from granite and a docket that clearly bored him, more than it should have, looked over his glasses at Camille. Please state your case, Mrs. Boudreau, he said. Camille rose and walked to the witness stand with the practiced posture of a woman carrying the weight of the world. Your Honor, she began, her voice trembling on cue. It breaks my heart to be here. Wendell has been like a father to me, but over these last months his decline has been rapid and frightening. He sees things that aren't there. He becomes aggressive. He forgot who his own son was. She gestured to a screen mounted on the courtroom wall. We have video evidence, Your Honor. We only recorded it to show the doctors how bad it had become. It's painful to watch, but necessary. The video played. There I was on the floor of my own dining room, screaming about rats, fumbling with my belt, sobbing for a mother 30 years in her grave. The courtroom went silent. I watched the bailiff and the court reporter glance at me with a pity I had engineered on purpose, and it still stung more than I expected. Dr. Penrose took the stand next, adjusting his glasses again before he spoke, using large words the way small men often do as armor. Based on the video evidence and my review of Mr. Boudreau's file, he said, it's my professional opinion that he is suffering from rapid-onset vascular dementia, compounded by paranoid psychosis. He is a danger to himself and others. The family is making the only responsible choice available to them. Judge Wexley nodded unmoved and picked up his pen. The narrative was clean. The evidence was visual. The expert had spoken. He looked at me over his glasses. Mr. Boudreau, he said, do you have anything to say before rule? I said nothing. I looked instead at Marguerite. She stood. She did not look like a woman about to lose. She looked like a shark that had just tasted blood in the water. She smoothed her jacket and lifted a single sheet of paper from her briefcase. Your Honor, she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the room. We do not dispute the behavior in that video. Mr. Boudreau was indeed hallucinating. He was indeed losing motor control. He was indeed experiencing psychosis. Camille smiled and nudged her attorney's arm, certain Marguerite was conceding the case for her. However, Marguerite continued, dropping her voice a full register. We dispute the cause. Dr. Penrose claims dementia. We claim poisoning. The word hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Camille's smile disappeared.
Dr. Penrose shifted in his seat hard enough for it to creak. The judge lowered his pen.
Poisoning, he repeated. That is a serious accusation, counselor. Do you have proof?
Marguerite walked toward the witness stand, though she kept her eyes fixed on Penrose rather than the judge. Doctor, are you familiar with a compound called scopolamine?
I am, Penrose, said sweat beading along his hairline.
It's used for motion sickness. In high doses, it can cause hallucinations. And are you aware, Marguerite pressed, that when mixed with certain antipsychotics, it produces a state of severe suggestibility and cognitive dissonance, nearly indistinguishable from dementia?
I suppose that's theoretically possible, Penrose stammered.
But there is no evidence Mr. Boudreau consumed such a combination.
Marguerite turned toward the judge.
Your Honor, 3 days ago, Mrs. Boudreau prepared a meal for my client. My client, suspicious of sudden generosity after months of open hostility, preserved a sample. He also fed a small portion to a stray animal which suffered an immediate seizure.
Camille shot up out of her chair.
"Objection!" she shouted. "This is ridiculous! He's making this up! He's paranoid, remember?"
"Sit down, Mrs. Boudreau," Judge Wexley barked. He turned back to Marguerite. "Continue."
"We sent the sample to an independent toxicology lab," Marguerite said, handing a folder to the bailiff. "This is the report. The food contained lethal levels of scopolamine and haloperidol, enough to compromise the neurological function of a man twice Mr. Boudreau's size." She turned back to Penrose. "So, doctor, my question is this. Did you diagnose a man with dementia because he was genuinely ill, or because you were paid to help conceal an attempted poisoning?"
Penrose went pale, his eyes darting toward Camille, then toward the exit.
"I made my diagnosis based on information provided by the family," he stuttered. "If the patient was intoxicated, that was not disclosed to me." He was already throwing her under the wheels of the same truck she'd hired him to drive. The judge read the toxicology report in silence, his expression darkening with every line. When he looked up, the disgust on his face matched something I had been carrying for weeks. "This court takes allegations of elder abuse and poisoning very seriously," he said. He struck his gavel once, hard. "I am denying the petition for guardianship effective immediately. I am also forwarding this evidence to the district attorney's office for criminal review. Dr. Penrose, do not leave the building." Camille's face had gone the color of old paper. She grabbed her attorney's sleeve, hissing something I couldn't hear. He pulled his arm away and gathered his files without meeting her eyes. The courtroom dissolved into noise. Reporters in the back row suddenly awake and typing. I sat still, watching Camille, who was no longer looking at the judge or her lawyer or the ruin unfolding around her. She was looking toward the back of the room, where a man in a dark coat sat alone in the last row, half in shadow, unbothered by the chaos he'd caused. He did not look angry. He looked like a man calculating the cost of a failed investment. He raised one hand, slow and deliberate, and tapped his own wrist where a watch would sit. Then he drew a flat line across his throat with 2 fingers, a gesture with only one possible translation. "Time's up. Cut your losses." Camille understood it instantly. Her face drained further, and I watched 25 years of another man's patience finally arrive to collect what he believed he was owed. 2 hours after that gavel fell, Camille walked into a glass tower downtown, carrying a folder that would either save her life or end it, and she had no idea which one it actually was. I watched her go, thinking of every version of my brother I had known, before he became a man who wore other men's names. I watched from across the street, parked in my truck with the engine idling low while she crossed the plaza toward the entrance of Kessler Development, clutching that leather portfolio to her chest like it held the crown jewels. In a way, to her it did. Inside sat a deed forged with real care by Marguerite's team, referencing a survey number that looked legitimate on its face, but pointed to 10 acres of worthless swamp, 11 miles south of the actual terminal. Roland had delivered it to her that morning, with tears in his eyes, and a story about his father finally breaking a performance good enough that even I, watching from the truck, had felt a small flicker of pride I hadn't expected. Desmond, I imagined, was already pouring himself a scotch inside that building, celebrating the acquisition of the final piece he believed completed his empire, unaware he was toasting a lie built from the exact same instinct for deception he had spent 25 years perfecting. His own surveyors would eventually catch the error. By then, the money would be moved, and so would we. Camille did not go home to pay a debt or feed her daughter. She went straight to the jewelry district. I watched her walk into a boutique and emerge 20 minutes later, wearing a watch that likely cost more than my first house. She hailed a limousine instead of a cab and had it take her to the Bellamy, the most expensive hotel this city had to offer. She rented the presidential suite. She did not call Roland to share the good news. She did not call me to gloat. Not yet. She called her friends the sycophants who had once laughed at my truck from across a marble driveway and told them to come celebrate. I drove home to Odessa. We sat at the kitchen table and watched the trap close in real time on a laptop screen. Marguerite had set up monitoring on the account Roland shared with Camille. We watched the deposit land $2 million, 6 zeros, that would have solved every problem in her life if she'd had the sense to be careful with them, the same 6 zeros Elias had spent 25 years assembling, one lie at a time. She did not have that sense. 10 minutes after the deposit cleared, the withdrawals began. $50,000 for the suite, $20,000 for catering, $10,000 for a DJ neither of us had ever heard of. She was burning through stolen money like kindling, throwing herself a coronation, before the crown had even been confirmed. And I found myself thinking that greed, in the end, is its own kind of confession, spending itself faster than any lawyer could ever hope to extract it. "It's time," Odessa said quietly, watching the screen. I agreed, and I picked up the phone not to call the police. Not yet, but to call Mr. Henderson, the trustee who had managed the Nadia Education Trust for 2 decades. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "it appears there's been a fraudulent transfer of assets belonging to the trust. I believe the authorities need to be notified." Henderson did not ask a single question. He already knew the shape of this particular play. "I'm on it, Mr. Boudreau," he said. "The Financial Crimes Division has been tracking this account since the earlier filing. I'll give them the green light tonight." Camille did not disappoint us in the waiting. At 8 that evening, she went live again, this time to a much larger audience than her private circle. Odessa leaned over my shoulder as the video loaded, showing the presidential suite draped in white roses and gold balloons, a room full of people dancing and drinking champagne they hadn't earned. Camille stood in the center of it, gold-dressed champagne bottle in one hand, phone in the other. Her face flushed with something well past confidence. "Hello, world," she screamed into the camera. "Look at this. We made it. They said we were broke. They said we were nothing. The old man tried to starve us out. Well, guess what, Wendell? I just sold your precious dirt for $10 million. We got the deposit today. $2 million cash, the rest coming next week. And you know the best part? We don't need you anymore." She wandered toward a table stacked with cash she'd withdrawn purely for the visual, fanning herself with a bundle of hundreds for the camera. "This is what winning looks like," she sneered at the lens. "I took what Roland was too weak to take. I am the queen of the city." The viewer count kept climbing steadily, hundreds becoming thousands within minutes. Most of the comments congratulated her, hearts and champagne emojis scrolling past faster than either of us could read them. An audience entirely oblivious to the confession she was broadcasting to the world in real time, unaware they were watching a woman hand a prosecutor her own case, free of charge. Then the mood in that room changed. A sound cut through the music, not part of it, a loud, rhythmic banging that made Camille frown and turn toward the door. "Who invited the drummer?" she slurred. The banging came again, louder, more insistent. "Open up! Police!" The music died mid-note. Guests froze mid-step drinks halfway to their mouths. Camille stared at the door, then at the camera still recording in her own hand, her face draining of every ounce of color it had left. "What's going on?" she whispered. The double doors of the suite exploded inward. Camille spent that night in a holding cell, and by morning the only person still willing to speak to her on the phone was the one man in this story who had never once cared what happened to her. Marguerite called with the details before the local news even picked up the story. Financial crimes agents had taken Camille into custody at the Bellamy,
on charges of wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy. The deposit traced directly back to the trust, within hours of hitting her account. She had been read her rights, standing in a gold dress in front of 40 stunned party guests, still holding a fistful of $100 bills when the cuffs went on. I felt no triumph hearing it. I felt the particular tiredness that comes after a long fight finally lands its cleanest punch. Satisfaction and exhaustion arriving in the same breath. Across town, in an office on the 40th floor of a glass tower he'd built on borrowed patience, Elias was learning the same news from a different direction entirely. I did not witness what happened in that office myself. I learned it later, in pieces, from Marguerite, from a title company clerk who owed her a favor. His surveyors had finished their review of the deed by mid-morning. The parcel Camille sold him for $2 million did not sit beside his terminal. It sat 11 miles south. Underwater, more months of the year than not, a survey number close enough to the real thing to fool a man in a hurry, and nowhere near close enough to fool his own engineers once they finally looked. He drove to the county jail himself that afternoon, according to the clerk, calm the entire way. The calm of a man recalculating rather than raging. "You sold me a swamp," he told her, according to the account that reached me third hand, but rang true in every detail. My surveyors just confirmed it. The deed you gave me points to mud, not to my terminal. Camille, still in her jumpsuit, reportedly went white and denied it, insisted Roland had handed her that envelope in good faith, insisted his father had truly broken. "The old man played you Elias," apparently told her. And something in his voice must have carried real admiration for me buried inside the insult, because the clerk repeated that particular line twice unprompted. "He played us both. He built the trap, and you walked straight into it. You're no use to me anymore." Whatever affection or partnership Camille believed she'd built with him over months of secret calls evaporated in that hallway. She had been a tool sharp enough to use, and the moment she dulled, disposable enough to discard without ceremony. I understood something about my brother in that story I had not fully understood before. He had never needed a partner. He had only ever needed leverage, and leverage once spent is simply debris. My phone rang an hour later. The caller ID read unknown, but I already knew. "Hello, Elias," I said before he could speak. There was a pause on the line long enough that I wondered if the sound of his real name, spoken aloud for the first time in 25 years, had actually landed somewhere. "Hello, Wendell," he said, finally, his voice smooth, cultured, entirely unbothered. "I assume you've heard about my business partner's unfortunate morning?" "She's not my daughter-in-law anymore," I said. "Not that she ever should have been yours to use." "Fair enough," he said. "She was a poor investment. But you and I have unfinished business. You embarrassed me. You cost me $2 million and made me look foolish in front of people whose respect I've spent years buying. You tried to steal my land," I said. "You sent a woman into my family to poison us and lock us away. We are even, Elias." "We are not even," he said, and for the first time his composure cracked. Just slightly, just enough for the old anger beneath the new name to show through. "I want that terminal. I have wanted it for 25 years, and I am not leaving this city without it." "You'll get nothing," I said. "The police already have a fraud case building against you. You're finished here." There was a long silence, the kind that used to precede our father's worst decisions when we were boys. And I braced myself, without knowing exactly what I was bracing for. "You think a badge protects you?" he said quietly. "You forgot the rules of the port, Wendell. You forgot how we used to settle things before either of us had lawyers." "I did not forget," I said. "Good," he said, "because I have something of yours. Something far more valuable than land." My chest went cold before he even finished the sentence. "I have a little bird," he said. "Her name is Nadia." The kitchen around me seemed to disappear entirely. Every sound in the house replaced by the rush of my own blood in my ears. "She's very sweet," he continued. "Fast asleep when my men collected her from the after-school program. You really should look into better security, brother." "Let her go," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I had not felt in decades. "She's a child.
This is between us. It is between us, he agreed. And she is the currency now. You have 2 hours. Bring me 20 million in cash or sign over the real deed this time. If you don't, you can come collect her from the port. In pieces. The line went dead. The phone stayed pressed to my ear for a long moment after the call ended. The dial tone flat and endless. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator hummed its ordinary hum. Odessa's knitting needles had gone still on the table where she'd left them the night before. 2 rows of a scarf that would never be finished at this rate. Outside the kitchen window, a mockingbird worked through its morning routine on the fence post, indifferent to everything happening on our side of the glass. I set the phone down on the counter, slowly. The way a man sets down something he is afraid might still be live. Odessa found me, still standing at the counter with the phone in my hand, the dial tone long since replaced by silence. And the first thing she said was not a question, it was an order. "Call the police," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of one hand, though her voice had already steadied into something closer to iron than panic. "Call Agent Miller. Whoever handled the fraud case, call someone." "No," I said. She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language, her knitting needles still lying abandoned on the table, where they'd fallen when I told her what Elias had said. "Agent Miller is a good man," I said, "but he follows procedure. He'll set up a perimeter. He'll call in negotiators. He'll wait for the right moment. And while he waits, Elias might panic. He might hurt her before anyone gets close enough to stop it. Men like my brother don't respond well to being cornered by badges. They respond to being outnumbered by people who love something more than they fear consequences." Then what? Odessa asked. "What do we do, Wendell?" I walked to the hallway closet and pulled down a metal box I hadn't opened in over a decade, the lock stiff with disuse. Inside sat a burner phone, dust thick along its seams, a relic from a version of my life I'd promised myself I would never need again. Back when the port still settled its disputes with fists and phone calls instead of lawyers. "We're not calling the police," I said. "We're calling family. Not the blood kind, the other kind. The family of sweat and diesel and 40 years on the same stretch of river." I dialed a number from memory, my thumb finding the digits before my mind fully remembered them. It rang twice. "Yeah," a deep voice answered. "Otis," I said. "It's Wendell." There was a pause, then warmth flooding into his voice like a furnace catching. "Boss, it's been a long time. Heard you retired." "I was," I said. "But a man named Elias just took my granddaughter." The silence on the other end changed shape entirely. The particular quiet of a man reaching for a weapon instead of a memory. Elias Otis said slowly, "Your brother, I thought that name died with the old shipping days." "He's back," I said. "Calls himself Desmond Kessler now. He's holding her at the old terminal warehouse. He wants money. He wants land. I need noise, Otis. I need iron. I need every driver you can reach within 100 miles. I want to surround that building until he understands exactly what he touched." "Say no more," Otis said, already moving. I could hear it in the sudden shift of his breathing. "I'll hit the radio. Give us 20 minutes. I hung up and pulled my old leather jacket from the closet. The one that still smelled faintly of engine oil and a decade I thought I'd left behind for good. Odessa grabbed my arm before I reached the door, her grip fierce for a woman her size. "I'm coming with you," she said. "No," I said. "You stay here, in case he calls again. In case she finds her way home on her own and needs someone standing in that doorway when she does." She held my collar, forcing me to look directly into her eyes. The same eyes that had looked at me across a courthouse gate 43 years earlier, and decided, for reasons I still didn't fully understand, that I was worth the risk. "Bring her back, Wendell," she said. "Bring her back, or don't bother coming back yourself." I kissed her forehead and told her I would, though I had no real way of knowing whether that was a promise I could keep. I climbed into the truck. The engine roared to life, the same familiar, comforting sound it had made every morning for 27 years, and I pulled out of the driveway toward the highway. I switched on the CB radio silent for a decade and found it suddenly, startlingly alive. "Breaker 19, this is Otis calling all haulers. We have a code red. The boss needs us. Destination Westside Terminal. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Let's roll. Static crackled. Then a voice cut through it. This is Red Dog on I-40. I'm rolling. Another followed. Tanker Tom, 10 minutes out. I'm rolling. Then another and another voices from the north side of the county, and the south men whose names I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Men I had once bailed out of trouble, fed during strikes, hired when nobody else would take a chance on them. One by one they answered the call until the radio was a wall of static and engines, and old loyalty finally called due. I looked in my rearview mirror. Headlights appeared on the highway behind me. First a pair, then 10, then what looked like 50. Massive 18-wheelers and flatbeds and dump trucks, air horns blasting loud enough to shatter the quiet of the interstate. Their combined lights turning the night into something closer to day than midnight. Some of those trucks belonged to men who had buried fathers with my help. Some belonged to men whose sons I had put through community college with quiet, unspoken loans nobody ever called loans. 40 years of decency, most of it unremembered by the man who'd offered it, was rolling up behind me now in a wall of steel. I was not an old man alone in a pickup truck anymore. I was the spearhead of an army built entirely out of iron, and 40 years of quiet decency finally called in to collect its debt. I pressed the accelerator down. "Hold on, Nadia," I whispered into the windshield, to no one, to everyone. "Grandpa's coming, and he's bringing hell with him." I walked into the warehouse alone, and the last sound I heard before the door groaned shut behind me was the rest of my life deciding without asking my permission whether it would still include a son. The space swallowed the sound of my footsteps, vast and cold, lit by a single work light hanging from a chain in the center of the room. Under it stood Elias, older than I remembered, thinner, dressed in a coat that cost more than the building we were standing in. He held a pistol loosely, the way a man holds something he has used before and expects to use again. On a wooden pallet near his feet sat Nadia, small and rigid, her wrists bound, her eyes wide with a fear no 8-year-old should ever have to learn the shape of. Beside her, on the concrete, lay Camille, freed on bail hours earlier for reasons I still hadn't untangled, her face bruised, her expensive dress torn at the shoulder. Wendell Elias called out, his voice echoing off corrugated metal. "You came alone. Bold. Or stupid. I've never been able to tell the difference with you." I stopped 10 feet away, hands visible at my sides. "I'm here, Elias," I said. "Let the girl go." He laughed, stepping down off the small platform he'd been standing on, gun swinging loose at his side. "You're not in a position to make demands, old man. You're on my property, in my world now. Where's my money?" "I didn't bring it," I said. His smile vanished. He raised the gun level with my chest. "Then you came here to die," he said. "Look at you," he continued, circling slightly. An old man in a leather jacket, driving a truck held together with rust and stubbornness. "You think you're still the king of the docks? I have the land, I have the power, and in about 30 seconds I'll finish what our father should have settled between us decades ago." "I did not bring the money, Elias," I said deliberately, "and I did not come alone." He frowned, glancing past me at the empty dark beyond the door. "Ghost stories," he said. "There's no one here." I checked my watch. "Listen," I said. For a moment there was only wind against the corrugated roof. Then a vibration started low in the concrete, traveling up through the soles of my boots, growing into a deep, guttural roar like the earth itself deciding to speak. "What is that?" Elias demanded, glancing upward. "That," I said, "is the sound of everyone you ever underestimated." The air horns came next. Not one, but dozens, a wall of sound that cracked windows high in the rafters. Elias staggered back, hands rising instinctively to cover his ears. His hired men reached for their weapons, eyes darting toward the walls as though the building itself had turned against them. Then the wall behind me exploded inward. A cherry-red Mack truck tore through the corrugated siding as though it were paper, headlights blinding, metal shrieking as it peeled away from the frame. Another followed, then another, forming a wall of steel and chrome around the edges of the room. Doors flew open. Men climbed down, not soldiers, not police, dock workers and haulers with forearms like cable carrying tire irons and chains, moving with the slow, unstoppable momentum of a landslide. Otis walked at the front, a crowbar looking like a toothpick in his enormous hand. "You picked the wrong family, Elias," he growled. Elias spun, panic finally cracking through his composure. He lunged toward the pallet and hauled Nadia up by the arm, pressing the barrel of the gun against her small temple. "Back off!" he screamed. "Or the girl dies right here!" The men froze. I stepped forward slowly, both hands raised. "Elias," I said, "look around you. 50 men. 6 bullets. Do the math." "I don't care," he shouted, dragging Nadia toward a side exit, his voice fraying at the edges. "I'm leaving and she's coming with me. Anyone moves, she dies." I tensed to close the distance, knowing even as I moved that I would never be fast enough to matter. But I was not the only one who had been hiding in that warehouse. From the shadows near the loading equipment, a figure emerged. Suit torn, face streaked with dirt and tears, Roland had slipped in during the chaos of the trucks breaching the wall. Waiting, watching. His daughter with a gun pressed to her head, and something in him that had been sleeping for 30 years finally woke all the way up. He did not look like the man who had begged me for money in a park. He did not look like the man who had lied to his own wife's face out of fear. He looked in that instant like a father. He saw the gun. He saw the distance between Elias and the door. He did not hesitate. "No!" he roared, launching himself out of the shadows. Elias turned toward the sound, swinging the barrel away from Nadia and toward the man charging him. Roland did not stop. He dove. The gun fired. The sound was flat and enormous, swallowing every other noise in the warehouse for one suspended second. And then Roland was on the ground, and Nadia was screaming, and I was moving faster than my 71-year-old legs had moved in decades, faster than I believed they still could. I dropped to my knees beside him. My hands found his shoulder, warm and wet, and refused for one useless heartbeat to understand what they were feeling. I reached for my phone, and my fingers would not close around it properly, fumbling twice before I managed to pull it from my pocket, my hands shaking harder than I had ever let them shake in front of another living soul. "Son," I said. His eyes found mine, unfocused, and he smiled anyway, a small, bloody smile. "Did I do it?" he whispered. "Is she safe now?" One of the truckers had already cut Nadia's bonds. She was running toward us, sobbing. "She's safe," I said, pressing my palm hard against the wound, my voice breaking apart despite every effort to hold it together. "You saved her, son. You did it." Roland closed his eyes. "I'm not a dog," he whispered. "No," I said. Tears running freely now, no longer something I had the strength to hide. "You're a lion." The letter arrived on cheap government-issue paper, and by the time Roland finished reading it, I understood that the woman who wrote it had one card left to play, and she was betting everything on the idea that my son still loved her enough to fold. The hospital room had been quiet for 2 days before that letter came. I sat in a plastic chair in the corner watching my son sleep, his shoulder wrapped in thick bandages, his leg elevated in a cast running from toes to hip. Surgeons had spent 12 hours piecing him back together. They saved his arm. The damage to his leg was permanent, a shattered femur, severed nerves that would never fully recover. He would carry a limp for life, a reminder of the night he finally stood up and stayed standing. When he woke, his eyes were cloudy with morphine. Panicked until they found me in the corner. "Dad," he rasped. "Nadia's safe," I said, standing to pour him water with a straw. "She's with your mother, asking for you every hour." "And Camille?" he asked. "She's in jail," I said, "where she belongs." He nodded slowly. He did not ask if she was okay. Whatever spell she'd held over him for 6 years had broken somewhere on that warehouse floor, along with most of the bones in his leg. 2 days later, a public defender assigned to Camille's case arrived at the foot of his bed, tired and apologetic. "My client is requesting a visitation," the lawyer said. "She says she was coerced. She needs to explain."
Roland spoke before I could throw the man out myself. "I don't have a wife," he said, staring at the ceiling. "My wife died the moment she sold my daughter to a monster. Tell her I said to rot." The lawyer left without another word.
"I'm sorry," Dad Roland whispered once we were alone.
"For the leg, for the mess, for everything." "Don't apologize for the leg, son," I said, resting my hand on his good shoulder. "That limp is a medal. It proves you fought. We can rebuild houses. We cannot buy courage, and you found yours when it mattered most, because he had ultimately saved Nadia, and because I refused to press charges against my own son." The district attorney agreed to a plea deal. Probation and community service for Roland. A record, but freedom. Camille was not so fortunate. Kidnapping conspiracy, grand larceny, wire fraud, elder abuse charges, piling against her like snow in a slow blizzard. A week after Roland moved back into his old childhood bedroom to finish healing, the letter arrived. Odessa made coffee while Roland stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. "Burn it," he said finally. "Open it," I told him. "You need to see the end of this story with your own eyes." He tore it open and read in silence. His face went pale, then red, then something colder than either. He handed the letter to me without a word. "My dearest Roland," it began. "I know you're angry, but you have to listen to me. I did it for us. I was scared. Elias threatened me. But there is something wonderful. I'm pregnant, Roland. We're going to have a son. You cannot let your own child be born in prison. Please drop the charges. We can start over. Just the three of us. I love you. Yours, Camille." Roland looked up at me, his eyes wide with a horror I recognized, because I'd worn the exact same expression years earlier, standing in a hospital hallway myself. "Is it possible?" he asked. "Could she actually be pregnant?" "It's possible," I said carefully. "She's a young woman." He put his head in his hands. "If it's mine, Dad," he said, "I can't just leave him. I can't let him grow up the way you found me." The guilt was already eating him alive exactly the way Camille had known it would. She had built her entire announcement around his one unbreakable weakness, the desperate belief that he could still be a good father to someone, even a child conceived in the middle of a conspiracy to destroy his own family. I stood and walked to the safe in my study. I spun the dial and reached past the deeds and the cash to a thin manila folder buried at the very back. A file I had hoped never to open again in either of our lifetimes. I carried it back and set it in front of him. "She's lying, son," I said. "Open it." "How do you know?" he asked, staring at the folder like it might bite him. "Because I know your medical history better than she ever will," I said. "Open it." Roland opened the folder with hands that hadn't fully stopped shaking since the warehouse. Inside sat a medical report from 5 years earlier, the year he'd been hospitalized with a severe testicular infection, a complication from a sports injury he'd ignored too long. He read through the surgical notes, then reached the final line signed by the attending urologist. "Sterility confirmed, reversal impossible." "I forgot," he whispered. "God, Dad, I completely forgot." He'd been so sick that year, so lost in fever, that he'd likely blocked out the doctor's words the moment they were spoken. We had never once discussed it since. We let him heal, and the subject buried itself somewhere neither of us thought to dig again. "I can't have children," he said slowly. "No," I said gently. "You cannot." "So if she's pregnant," Roland said, his voice hardening into something entirely new, "then it isn't yours," I finished for him. The name hung between us without either of us needing to say it. Elias. The late nights, the secret calls. Camille had been sleeping with the enemy long before any of us understood there was an enemy at all. Carrying that man's child while she plotted in the same breath to have his own father declared incompetent. "It's the final nail," Roland said, folding the letter closed. "Send her the file. Let her see exactly how much I already know." I nodded and called Marguerite that evening. She arranged for a courier to deliver a certified copy of the report directly to the county jail, along with a short note in her own precise hand. "Dear Miss Boudreau, my client is in receipt of your letter regarding your pregnancy.
Please find attached a certified medical report confirming Mr. Boudreau's complete and irreversible sterility as of 5 years prior. As such, Mr. Boudreau denies paternity and has filed for immediate divorce on grounds of adultery. I did not go to the jail myself. I did not need to. The guard who delivered the mail happened to be an old acquaintance of Otis's, and he told us afterward what he'd seen. Camille had been sitting in the common room, working the other inmates for sympathy, telling anyone who'd listen that her wealthy husband had abandoned her and their unborn child. She tore the envelope open eagerly, certain it was a check or forgiveness or both. She read the note. She read the medical report. She read it again as though a third pass might change what the words already said. The guard told Otis she made a sound he would never forget. Not a scream exactly, more like a gasp that pulled every last bit of air out of the room at once. Her face went the color of wet ash. She dropped the paper and started shaking her head, denying it before anyone had even asked her a question. Then the screaming started, and it did not stop until her throat gave out. I found him at 2 a.m, sitting behind the wheel of my old Ford, engine off, garage door shut, staring into the dark the way a man stares at a door he can't decide whether to walk through. 3 weeks had passed since the letter from the jail. 3 weeks of physical therapy and slow, careful steps down the hallway with a cane he still resented needing. On the surface, Roland was healing. Underneath, I had started noticing the small signs a father learns to read without wanting to. Silences that lasted a beat too long. A certain flatness behind his eyes when he thought no one was watching. I had woken for a glass of water and seen light bleeding out from under the garage door. I opened it quietly. He sat gripping the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles pale, staring at nothing. I did not shout. I walked to the driver's door and opened it. He flinched, looked up at me with eyes that were hollow in a way I recognized from my own reflection during the worst years of my life. "I can't do it, Dad," he whispered. "The shame is too heavy. Every time I close my eyes, I see the gun. I see Nadia tied up. I see myself standing there useless while you walked into that warehouse alone because I was too weak to protect my own family. You walked in after me," I said. "You took the bullet meant for your daughter." "Too late," he said. "I am a failure. I built a life on lies, and it collapsed the second someone pushed on it. I'm 40 years old and I have nothing." "Get out of the truck," I said. "Dad, please," he started. "Get out," I said again, my voice hard enough to leave no room for argument. "Whatever you came out here to sit with tonight, you're going to sit with it standing on solid ground next to your father, not alone behind a wheel." He climbed out slowly, favoring his bad leg, and leaned against the fender, shaking. "You think ending it fixes anything?" I asked. "You think leaving your daughter without a father is an act of love? That's the coward's way, Roland. That's the Camille way. Run when it gets hard." "I'm not you," he said, tears breaking loose. "I'm not strong like you. I tried to be a big man and I nearly got my daughter killed. You have nothing because you spent 30 years building your life on the approval of people who never once earned the right to give it," I said. "Not Camille. Not the men in that co-working space pretending to be executives. Not even me, if I'm honest, because I spent your whole childhood teaching you to chase money, instead of teaching you what to do once you had it." He stared at me, breathing hard, something shifting behind the shame. "Get in my truck," I said. "There's somewhere I need to show you. Not tonight to end anything. Tonight to start something." We drove through a sleeping city. The streets empty except for the occasional delivery truck making its rounds. We did not go toward the port. We did not go toward the warehouse that had nearly taken his life. We drove instead to a stretch of land beside the old Terminal 5 acres that had once been nothing but weeds and a chain-link fence. The same land Camille had tried to steal. The same land Elias had built an entire scheme around. The land everyone in this story had assumed was worth exactly one thing. I pulled up to the fence and cut the headlights. "Look," I said. Roland looked out the window. The moon was bright enough to make out shapes he clearly hadn't expected. Not a construction site. not the foundation of a hotel or a warehouse, or anything resembling the $15 million payday Camille had gambled her marriage on. He saw trees newly planted but already tall enough to cast shadow. He saw a winding cobblestone path. He saw a playground with fresh equipment benches arranged in quiet clusters, flower beds still waiting for spring. At the center stood a modest stone archway with a name etched into bronze. The Odessa Boudreau Community Garden.
"It's a park," Roland said, confused.
"It's a park," I confirmed. "But the appraisal," he said. "The developers, the millions. You could have sold this. You could have retired somewhere warm and never thought about any of us again." "I don't need a palace, son," I said. "I have a home. I have your mother. I have Nadia. I have you still here, still breathing, sitting next to me in this truck. I have enough." I gestured toward the quiet rows of trees. Elias wanted to pave this over. Camille wanted to sell it for jewelry and a fresh start with a man who never loved her. They both saw a price tag. I saw what it could become instead. "This is what happens when you build on something real," I told him. "You build something that lasts, something that gives back instead of taking, something that makes the people around you better instead of just making your bank account fatter." Roland looked at the swings where his daughter would eventually play. He looked at the benches where old men would sit, playing checkers on slow afternoons. "You gave it away," he whispered. "I invested it," I corrected him. "In people, in memory, in something worth staying alive to see finished." I put a hand on his shoulder. "You wanted to bury the man who lied to his wife tonight," I said. "Good. Let him die. Let the man who was too afraid to say he'd lost his job die too, but you don't get to go with them, son. You stay, and then you start digging." "Digging?" he asked. "I fired the landscaping crew yesterday," I said. "I need a groundskeeper, someone to mow the grass, someone to paint the benches, someone to open the gates in the morning and lock them at night. It pays minimum wage. It's hard, humble work." I looked him in the eye. "Do you want the job?" Roland looked down at his own hands. Hands that had never once done real labor. Hands that had signed fraudulent papers and shaken hands with men he should have questioned. "You want me to cut grass?" he asked. "I want you to learn what it means to sweat for $1, I said. "I want you to learn there's no shame in dirt, only in lies. I want you to build yourself back up from the ground, son. Literally, and with both feet under you." He looked at the park one more time. He took a breath that seemed to reach all the way down to wherever the shame had been living, and for the first time in 3 weeks I watched something other than grief move across his face. "When do I start?" he asked. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, I said. "Don't be late. Your daughter's going to want to see her father walk through that gate." 6 months later, the sun was setting over our back porch, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and cornbread. Odessa laughed at something on the kitchen radio. Nadia chased fireflies across the grass, a sound in her that was pure and unburdened. Healing faster than any of us, because children forgive the world faster when they know they are loved. Roland stood at the grill in work boots stained with real dirt, his limp steady beneath him, a groundskeeper's tan already darkening his forearms. On the far side of the fence, past where our yard ended, you could just make out the new archway of the garden, lit gold by the last of the light. The bronze letters of his mother's name catching the sun one final time before dark. For 25 years, I believed a man protects his family by holding everything tighter, by trusting nothing he hasn't personally locked away. I built walls instead of doors, and I called it love, because I didn't know love could look like anything else. It took my own blood turning against me and my own blood finally standing up inside it to teach me the truth I'd been circling since I was 22 years old, in a courtroom, watching a brother choose a lie over me. Control was never the same thing as safety. And a man who never lets anyone close enough to disappoint him will never let anyone close enough to save him either. I think sometimes of the boy Elias was before he became a name he built to hide behind. And I think of the boy Roland was, before shame taught him to lie for love. I never got the first boy back. I got the second one scarred and limping and more honest than he has ever been in his life. And some nights that has to be enough because not every ledger closes clean, and not every wound finishes healing before the credits roll on a man's life.
If you're still with me, I want to ask you something. Not as a stranger telling a story, but as a father who nearly lost everything twice in 1 year. If someone you loved told you in the coldest voice you'd ever heard exactly what they thought you were worth, would you have the strength to wait to plan to answer with patience instead of rage? Or would you have already burned the whole house down by the time I even reached the gate?
I don't know the answer for you. I only know mine, and it cost me more than I ever expected to pay. If this story found something true in you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and tell me honestly which one of us you recognized yourself in tonight. Not the villain. One of us who stayed. And if you know someone still building walls instead of doors, send this to them gently. Sometimes the only thing standing between a family and the worst version of itself is one person willing to go first.